Hey y'all, Anteater here. As you might know, I've been beta testing Kingdom Rush Alliance for a few months. Now that the game is released, I'm pretty well acquainted with the overall balance of the heroes and towers. While I plan on doing a tower tier list soon, heroes are my favorite and my most well-versed aspect of the series, so I gotta do a tier list of these guys first. Now, to give an idea of how I'm going to be ranking these heroes, it's still going to be somewhat similar to how you would for normal heroes. Each hero contributes however much they contribute. Being paired up with a worse or better hero isn't going to affect their placement. While there can be synergies between certain heroes, there aren't enough to justify moving them up or down on the list. Also, star upgrades will not be affecting these rankings either. Another thing to note, the heroes in this game have dumbed down stats compared to heroes from other games, so what might not seem like a lot of damage in another game translates to much better in this game. 100 damage on a KRF hero skill is going to do a lot worse than 100 damage on a KRA hero skill. With that out of the way, let's get started.
Now sadly, there has to be a bad hero. And while this game's hero balance is pretty good, the worst hero is easily Torres. Now I will say, out of all the heroes in the game, he's definitely the second best at melee stalling. But like Jigu, that's all Torres is going for him. His base 520 health and 25% armor isn't a lot for stalling, but at least Lunch Break gives him a good healing option, giving him 200 health every 26 seconds. But his damage and utility are still awful. Demolition Man and Defensive Turret are supposed to give him some damage, but are both pretty flawed. Demolition Man only does 60 to 90 physical damage every 20 seconds, which isn't a lot. While Defensive Turret does have a good DPS, it's extremely annoying as it displaces Torres. With Torres' already slow speed, this displacement makes microing him even more of a pain. Men Outwork is another supportive skill, but again, the units both have pretty bad stats, so they almost always die before their 12 seconds are up. His hero spell, Wrecking Ball, does exactly as expected, and drops the Wrecking Ball on the path. It's solid for the damage and the 2-second stun, but just doesn't stand out like some other hero spells do. It's almost mandatory to play him with a fast hero like Grimson, Nairu, or Anya, as otherwise you won't be able to micro him effectively at all. And due to this lack of versatility and damage, Bad the Builder here ranks last. But luckily, he's the only bad hero in this game. Now the next hero we have here is Grimson. Grimson is nowhere near as bad as Torres, but still isn't great. His speed is pretty fast, so he's able to be microed efficiently, but many of his skills are pretty flawed. To start, his base stats are bad. Having only 315 health and no armor leaves little room for stalling, which makes two of his stalling skills pretty underwhelming. Renew Flesh can kill an enemy under 20% health and heal him for 60% health, but this insta-kill and Warhead's insta-kill are both odd, as there are very few enemies that they can actually target, so they end up just being for killing fodder. Grimson's I would say is the better of the two, as with it he's able to keep stalling for longer with his low health. Inner Beast is also situational, where it can only be activated when he's under 25% health, so he can end up dying easily against strong enemies that can actually activate it. But when it activates, it gives him a major damage boost and lets him heal from his basic attacks, so he'll be able to shred through weaker enemies with ease. Grimson's damage output overall is still solid. Heartseeker's overall 92 damage with a 10-second cooldown is, it's okay, and it being able to attack flying enemies is pretty nice. Deadly Spikes is also very good, dealing good true damage in an AoE with a moderate 30-second cooldown, so it's definitely the skill you want to micro Grimson around the most. His hero spell, Creeping Death, is very good for both crowd control and damage, but the slow activation means you gotta time it right. So while Grimson's overall damage output is high, him having contradictory skills, as well as super low base durability, means he won't be able to rank much higher. Now, the other Twilight Elf, the hero that takes the spot here, is Theion. She used to be, but now she's been buffed a sizable amount. To start, she has a passive teleport, so she's able to micro some of her skills easier, even if the teleport has a long minimum travel range. Her base damage of 26 to 48 every 1.5 seconds is pretty solid, and her skill Astral Reflection dealing 22 to 40 damage with the same attack speed for 12 seconds only furthers this. It isn't the best, but it's still pretty serviceable for single target damage. Black Aegis isn't always the best for the support it provides, only giving one unit 140 health worth of shield, but when it's used on another hero, it can be pretty effective. The 90 AoE damage it deals, after the shield is gone, can be okay for finishing off enemies in a pinch, but realistically it's still not that good. Speaking of AoE, Void Rift is a great AoE skill. dealing solid damage and a large AoE on a 20-second cooldown. Her other support option, Spatial Distortion, can be nice for short-range towers like artillery towers, as it can buff every tower on the map, so you don't need to worry about microing Theion around buffing specific towers. Cosmic Prison is also a solid crowd control skill, trapping enemies for 8 seconds and dealing 270 true damage to them. But the fact that they can't be damaged by outside sources for 8 seconds during the spell is a pretty big weakness, as it essentially turns the spell into a slightly better version of High Elven Mage's Time Lapse. Theion is just meant to be played around AoE damage with Void Rift, as her single target damage isn't the greatest and is also her biggest weakness. But her support and AoE control is still enough to bring her up to this spot. Now, onto one of my favorites in the game, we have Broden. Not much higher than Grimson or Theion, but still has more of an edge over them. To start, his basic attack is an AoE, and while it has a lower DPS than Cosmere's basic attack, it's still very good for crowd control. His other two forms of AoE control are with Carpet Bombing only dealing 48 damage to each hit enemy, which isn't even good by Kingdom Rush Alliance standards, and Terror Shriek being solid for the 2-second stun and slow, but not really being enough to make up for Carpet Bombing's lack of strength. Now surprisingly, his target DPS is where it's at. Exemplary Lead is the weakest of the single target skills, and while the animation can sometimes be a detriment, it can still damage unarmored enemies enough to not be a complete waste of a skill. Hunting Dive is a very good skill, insta-killing any enemy under 600 health every 20 seconds. The skill, unlike Grimson's or Warhead's insta-kills, can be used against any enemy under 600 health, not just the select few. So while this skill isn't going to get the exact 600 damage it can deal every time, the low 20-second cooldown means it'll regularly be able to execute high-priority enemies. Birds of Prey is also solid, summoning 2 birds that each deal 50 true damage every 1.5 seconds for 15 seconds. This can add up to a massive amount of damage, but due to the damage being spread out, and due to it being reliant on the bird's AI, it can't always be reliable for dealing with high-priority enemies, as it normally should. Overall, you want to be microing Broden around his basic attack and hunting dive to get the best from his AoE and single target capabilities. Now the heroes from here on out will be solid and useful for any scenario, and are pretty good displays of this game's heroes balance, for the most part at least. Now, for another personal favorite of mine, Onagro. I know a lot of people have been anticipating this guy, and you guys have been relieved, as Onagro is a solid hero. Like Doomtank, he can't go into melee combat, but unlike Doomtank, his move speed is super slow, so you'll want to pair him with faster heroes to make up for that. His basic attack is very good, and is definitely his best aspect, having a really high DPS and a long range, but is held back by its tendency to whiff when enemies die. His other form of single target damage, Gobbler Drones, is just kinda there. The drones can provide serviceable damage, but it's not an exceptional skill. This also applies to Power Slam and Tar Bomb. Tar Bomb can slow enemies by 50% for 7 seconds in a solid AoE, but the 26-second cooldown means that the skill isn't going to be heavily affecting enemies, and it can get wasted as it has artillery-like targeting, so placing Onagro farther up the path is a good way to get the most from this skill. Power Slam is just kinda weak, dealing only 60 damage in a small AoE every 20 seconds, and only stuns hit enemies for 1 second. While it is easy to micro considering how it activates directly under him, Onagro's slow speed makes it difficult and just makes the skill a worse version of Warhead's Power Slam. Mine Drop is a pretty solid skill, throwing a mine onto the path every 6 seconds. There can be up to 4 mines alive at the same time, and each one does 36 to 48 AoE damage. So when all 4 are active, it can make for some pretty good burst AoE damage. Death from Above is a both good and bad skill, with it being able to deal high true damage over the course of the duration. However, Zeppelin's targeting and long range means it can end up targeting weaker enemies farther away from groups if you don't place it very carefully. Onagro's strength comes from his single target damage with his hero spell and basic attack, and his other skills, while mediocre, only support him further. His slow speed still really holds him back as well, but at least he has the damage to defend lanes as well. Here we come with the first hero, and the most balanced in my opinion, Vesper. Vesper is a very similar hero to Eridan, in that he's both great for melee and ranged combat, without overly excelling in either. He has a respectable 300 health and 40% armor, as well as a meh 14 to 20 damage in melee, but a better 15 to 23 damage in range. His melee skills are both solid. Martial Flourish has the exact same damage and cooldown of Varric's aimed slashes, but is actually solid in this game. Disengage is okay, allowing Vesper to deal 360 burst damage when he dodges an attack at low health, but it won't activate on AoE attacks, so it can be limited on what enemies it will effectively activate on. His range skills are also tame. Ricochet deals 35 damage to up to 8 enemies, so while the damage per target is still low, it still has a high DPS compared to other skills to make up for it. Arrow to the knee, while it has only 90 damage and a 1-second stun, has a short 10-second cooldown, so microing around it is actually a really good thing. Vesper's hero spell, Arrow Storm, works exactly like Aerodance, dealing AoE true damage. While the damage isn't really exceptional, it's still solid and gives some form of AoE control. Vesper's biggest weakness is him only having physical damage. His skills all have short cooldowns and are able to effectively chip enemies down, but aren't too strong either. Making use of his ranged damage, while also making sure to get good use from Disengage and Martial Flourish is key to making good use of Vesper. Now onto the real fan favorite, and my all-time KRA favorite, is Warhead. Warhead's exceptional tankiness and abundant AoE damage gets him as high as he is currently, but his lack of single target damage is able to keep him from being too strong. Warhead's base tankiness is quite good, having 335 health and 69% armor, allowing him to tank against any enemy. His regular move speed is low, but when moving long distances he can fly walk and move much faster, which definitely helps in microing his skills. Deep Impact and Immolation are both low cooldown, short AoE skills that are meant to help chip enemies down. Deep Impact stuns enemies for 2 seconds as well, so the low damage is partly made up for, but it must be microed effectively due to its targeting. Immolation deals kinda low initial damage, dealing 36 and 108 explosive damage, but also deals 48 true burn damage over 4 seconds afterwards, so overall it'll still be dealing some decent damage. Smokescreen is a great skill, and it's definitely Warhead's best one, dealing good damage in a super wide AoE, and slowing enemies in an AoE by 50% for 5 seconds afterwards as well. The targeting can sometimes waste the ability, so properly placing Warhead is key to get great value from the skill. Iron Uppercut is definitely his worst skill. It's meant to kind of alleviate Warhead's low single target damage, insta-killing an enemy under 40% health, but like Grimson's Renew Flesh, can only insta-kill certain weaker enemies, so overall it won't have a really good DPS. His hero spell, Motorhead, travels down the path, already having a huge AoE, and deals 260 physical damage, as well as 16 burn damage afterwards. While the damage is mediocre, the huge AoE the skill has is extremely good in this game. Warhead's combination of both exceptional tanking skills and great AoE damage allows him to rank this highly on the list, but effective micro of his skills is definitely key and can definitely bring him down if he wastes them. Now next up we have the muscle mommy herself, Railan. Railan is a very straightforward hero, who's just meant to excel in melee combat, and she does that very well. Her base stats are pretty good, having 400 health and 50% armor to stall enemies quite nicely. With her slow speed, it can be an issue when regenerating her health, so she has 2 ways of helping her tank further in Unbreakable and Inspire Fear. Unbreakable gives her a shield of 30% of her max HP for each enemy near her, which can give her a total shield of 480 health for 6 seconds. This shield can be quite useful against stalling big enemies, as it's quite a big shield when she gets the full bonus. Inspire Fear will stun nearby enemies in an AoE around her for 2 seconds, and will also make them deal 80% less damage for 6 seconds after that, meaning she'll be able to tank against enemies for longer. She also has pretty good single target damage as well, with Brutal Slash dealing 480 true damage to a single target, and Onslaught doubling her attack speed for 10 seconds on an 18-second cooldown. But besides Onslaught, her biggest weakness are her skill cooldowns. Unbreakable, Inspire Fear, and Brutal Slash all have high cooldowns, 35 seconds, 30 seconds, and 30 seconds respectively. This means she won't be completely reliable, and microing around her skills is very important. But to help give her even more blocking power, her hero spell Command Order summons a Dark Knight onto the field for 20 seconds. When you're using a hero with Railan that has bad blocking power, this hero spell is a great way to alleviate that. Even if you do have another good stalling hero, it's just great in general to have a third big tough unit to help stall and deal true damage, but it is on a hefty 60-second cooldown. Taking note of Railan's cooldowns is especially important, especially with Brutal Slash and Unbreakable being as strong as they are when used correctly. Railan is a single target machine and should be used as such. Next up, Nairu is another great hero, and he's very simple too, having a versatile set of skills that let him be so strong. His basic attack alone is quite strong, and while 18 to 53 magic damage every 1.5 seconds might not seem like a lot, it's quite impressive for KRA. And he isn't useless in melee combat either. While he does have a low 215 base health, his skill Leaf Whirlwind will both heal him for 8 seconds and damage enemies in an AoE around him during this time as well. The blocking power and melee damage he gives to him is very good, and even with a 35-second cooldown, it's still very good for stalling and damage. His other supportive skill, Enfeeblement Char, reduces the damage of enemies in an AoE by 90% for 8 seconds. This allows pretty much any unit, even Nairu himself, to stun any enemy during those 8 seconds, which can be extremely useful for the final area because of how strong enemies like the Golems of Blade-Claw Horrors are. His other damage skills are respectable as well. Sentinel Wisps summon 3 wisps that each deal magic damage every second, and while total the damage isn't super high, it still has a moderate 25-second cooldown and can still be great burst damage for flying enemies. But Verdant Blast is also amazing, dealing 360 magic damage to a single target. Like Railan's Brutal Slash, this skill is super good for burst damage and has a 30-second cooldown, so it still has a respectable DPS. It's pretty similar to Olok's Demonic Blast though, and can sometimes have weird targeting and basically not hit an enemy. Nairu's hero spell, Root Defender, is solid, slowing and damaging all enemies in a huge AoE for 7 seconds, which can be good for lining up fast enemies for artillery shots. All in all, Nairu has a great mix of damage and utility that let him be this high on the list, but he isn't as versatile as our next hero. Anya is definitely the game's most versatile hero. Her base stats are pretty alright. She only has 280 health, 25% armor, and 8 to 12 damage with her basic attack in melee. But not only in melee does she have a 0.8 second attack speed, but it deals the listed damage twice per attack, so her DPS is actually double what it says. Her ranged attack is also excellent for damage, dealing 48 to 70 physical damage on a 2.5 second attack speed. But easily her best skill is Vampiric Claw, which deals true damage to the enemy and heals her for 20% of the enemy's max health every 7th melee basic attack. With a 0.8 second attack speed, every 5.6 seconds she'll be able to heal. This gives her the best tanking abilities in the game, period, with her not being able to reliably tank against literally every single enemy in the game. Her damage is also quite good all around as well. Misty Step is a super high DPS skill, dealing 56 to 82 physical damage to up to 3 enemies on an only 15-second cooldown. Morgan's Storm is great for AoE true DPS as well, dealing 66 to 110 true damage in an AoE every 20 seconds. And yet again, her Dusk Beast summons 2 bats that deal 4 to 8 damage every 0.5 seconds for 8 seconds on a 10-second cooldown. All of this damage adds up to be a lot, on top of Anya's already insane tanking abilities. Her hero spell, however, is kinda meh. Dante shows up for 12 seconds to deal true damage to nearby enemies. And while it is good to have another source of single target true damage, the damage it adds overall is pretty low. But it does have the added bonus of reviving Anya if she has died nearby. So overall, Anya's super high numbers makes her insanely versatile and therefore lets her steal this 3rd spot. But the next 2 will be pretty obvious. Now the top 2 heroes being dragons is pretty predictable. And in second, we have Luminer. Luminer boasts impressive single target damage as well as still having good support. Her base damage is pretty solid, dealing 38 to 74 true damage every 2 seconds. Even if it isn't a ton of damage, it's still true damage, which is always good. Her other form of single target true damage, Celestial Judgment, deals 540 true damage to an enemy every 35 seconds. 540 true damage is a shit ton of damage to be doing in this game, so whenever it's not wasted, it is very good. It also stuns the hit enemy and nearby enemies for 2 seconds, which means, yeah, sure, I gave it more stuff. She also has more single target damage with Light Companion, which summons a companion over the other hero to deal 19 to 29 physical damage every second to a nearby enemy for 15 seconds. This does have a long cooldown, so overall the DPS is mediocre, but it's still just added damage. Radiant Wave is pretty much just a weaker version of Boneheart's Plague Carriers, but it's still good in this game, being able to chip down tons of enemies due to the AoE. Blessing of Retribution is also a solid support skill, giving nearby allies 30% armor and causing them to reflect back 60% of the damage they take for 8 seconds. When using this with the Paladin reinforcements, Paladin Tower, or an allied hero, they can help support your allies with both defense and offense with the thorn it provides. Her hero spell, Call of Triumph, summons 3 warriors to each stun 1 enemy on the path and deal a lot of true damage to each one. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's around 360 to 440 true damage to each enemy. But it does require that you have 3 big tough enemies to target, or else it just becomes a big waste on weaker enemies. Playing Luminer around her insane single target true damage, as well as her great supportive skills, is a great way to make sure Luminer stays on top. Now finally, the best hero in KRA is Cosmere. He looks the part too. As expected, Cosmere's insane amount of AoE damage lets him keep his spot. His basic attack even has a sizable AoE, and deals 35 to 55 physical damage every 2 seconds. All of his skills have an AoE in some capacity as well. Paralyzing Breath stuns all enemies in an AoE for 4 seconds every 16 seconds, which is great for lining up enemies for Cosmere's other AoE skills. Power Conduit is solid as well, dealing 25 damage every second for 10 seconds in an AoE, as well as slowing hit enemies by 70%. The AoE isn't very forgiving though, and can end up missing as Cosmere tends to place it where enemies are going to, and won't account for if they will be stalled by allies. He also has an insta-kill like Broden's, which definitely isn't good as Hunting Dive, considering it has a 15-second higher cooldown and a lack of good way to micro it, but it can insta-kill enemies under 800 health instead of 600, and will also explode and deal area damage afterwards. His best skill though is easily Prismatic Shards. This skill creates multiple crystals from the ground in a huge AoE that deals lots of physical damage. Multiple shards are able to hit the same enemy, causing it to deal even more damage, with each shard dealing around 72 to 108 physical damage. What's even better is that skill only has a 25-second cooldown, and it won't activate if Cosmere is not over the path, so you're easily able to micro it. His hero spell, Crystal Avalanche, isn't technically AoE, but it might as well be. It targets up to 8 enemies with falling shards that will each deal 104 to 156 true damage to each enemy. Only one shard can hit an enemy, so they don't use it against isolated enemies to expect all of them to hit the one, but even then, it's a ton of damage. Even on a 45-second cooldown, the total DPS the skill has can be easily impressive. Customer takes the spot pretty easily, having insane AoE damage and crowd control in all of his skills. His only real weakness is against single targets, but his AoE damage is so good that that weakness doesn't really matter that much. Now here's a final list, and now some of my final closing statements. I know my list isn't objective, some heroes here you might find stronger than others, but that's fine. Let me know in the comments what you think about this list. Soon enough I'll have a video ranking all of the towers, so make sure to be prepared. In October when the KRA post-campaign releases, I'll definitely be making 2 more videos updating my tier list, as they'll be making some new balance changes in the update as well. If not, I'll still make a short one for the new heroes and tower, so be prepared. Anyways, see y'all later. Yeah, I realize now I made a mistake with my ranking. Um, Broden, he's coming up into the B tier just because I initially thought carpet bombing did like 30 damage initially. So that was kind of bad. But yeah, no, this is his real ranking. So see ya.